Perfect. Okay, so let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Hello, Sally. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining a fireside chat on living a value-focused life in the law. My name is Jacques Anderson. I am a board member for the Harvard Law School Association of New York. This conversation is part of a series of fireside chats that is really close to my heart, and it's all about highlighting the intersection of the legal practice and wellness. It's not something that's always talked about, but I think everyone on this call probably feels pretty strongly that we all as a community want to move in the direction of introducing and talking about topics related to coaching, wellness, mindfulness, etc. Personally, I am all about real practical conversations, and that's what you can expect today. Today, we will learn real coaching skills led by our dear Melanie, who I will introduce shortly. And we will even do a live exercise to identify some of our core values, just to really hammer this point home. So in terms of what we'll do today, I'll briefly get into introductions just so you know who we are, more about our background in the event it's an expansion point or inspiration for anyone else's story. Then we will dive into the meat of the fireside chat, which Melanie will lead. If at any time you have questions, please just raise your hand or use the chat that's below in the Google Meet. We will also reserve time at the end for any questions. And if there are no questions, Melanie, I have a few kind of like quick fire questions that I can ask you to pretty much round this home. And so to just really kick things off, I'll share a little bit about me, but I want to save the bulk of the conversation for Melanie. In addition to being on the Harvard Law School Association of New York board, I am a certified executive coach and human design guide. I'm very, very passionate about bridging the more traditional kind of corporate America of the law with the progressive, so like wellness and spirituality. And in terms of my background and how I got here, I started my career, probably similar to a lot of people on this call, in big law. I was an M&A associate at Skadden, and then I transitioned into an in-house counsel role at a startup called the Players Tribune that was started by Hall of Famer Derek Jeter. Then I co-founded my own digital health startup called Duos that helps older adults as they age. And then ultimately I pivoted into coaching a few years ago, almost by accident, which is a longer story. But the type of coaching I do really blends together traditional executive coaching and human design. Human design is a tool for understanding your energy, your superpowers, and like areas of conditioning. And it's a great tool in helping my clients pretty much understand some of their gifts and how they are designed. I coach individuals and teams, and most of my clients are former or current lawyers and entrepreneurs. And this conversation, as I mentioned earlier, is just really born from a desire to put more out there in terms of discourse about what does it mean to be a lawyer, but also show up for yourself in these ways. And so today I am joined here with the lovely Melanie. Melanie, I love to introduce yourself, but I'll just give a quick tidbit. Melanie is also a coach. We were the same year at HLS, although we did not know each other, which is, I feel like that always happens. But happy to be introduced. And then for those of you who are a follower, like who know human design, I'll just mention your profile in case it's helpful for others. Melanie is what we call an emotional manifesting generator with a 2-4 profile. And if most of you are like, that feels like gibberish, that's just simply a fancy way of saying Melanie is someone that's designed to be multifaceted and have like many passions and interests. She has probably a ton of energy, especially if it's directed at those things that really light her up. People with this type of profile often have a very non-traditional career path while they're going through it. But in hindsight, it all really fits together in terms of who they're able to serve. She's designed to really rely on how she feels to make decisions, and that clarity often comes over time. And then people with Melanie that have a 2-4 profile, they are individuals who are very unique in that one hand, they have all these special gifts and talents that have to kind of be pulled out of them because they may have the natural inclination to be very like introspective and like to themselves. And the other half is like someone who often really cares about the tribe and wants to give back. So Melanie, that's kind of like your human design profile. We will dig into it as it makes sense to come up. But I would love, love, love if you could introduce yourself and provide a bit more context about your career path in case people who are on this call are on a similar journey. And for sure, tell us how you got into coaching.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is such a treat.
Yes.
I am Melanie, contrary to what my box says. I'm just not that good at Google Meets, but that's the real Eric Lee. I don't know if he's in that direction on your screen. Anyway, I'm Melanie. I, as Jacques said, am a Harvard Law School grad. I graduated in 2014. And going into law school, I was pretty sure that what I wanted to do was global health policy. I knew that I wanted to do social justice work. I thought that work would be international. I love what you said about the non-traditional career path sort of making sense in hindsight, because I feel like I'm still sort of on that journey, but taking each step sort of based on what feels right, my curiosity and my values, which we'll talk about. But in law school, I focused on housing eviction defense work. And then after, I worked at a homeless shelter for youth in New York City, and I did general civil legal services there. Loved immigration work most of all. And so my next job was as an immigrants' rights attorney at an organization called Take Root Justice, which also has as a mission supporting grassroots organizing groups. And so I loved that. I did that for about 6.5 years until it was time to make a change. And I came across coaching by doing some self-coaching myself. And I think this had a lot to do with a focus on values and trying to kind of reorient myself away from goals with a capital G, and really kind of understanding that the stuff that lit me up the most day to day was sitting one-on-one with clients, connecting with them as humans, supporting them, holding space for them as they navigated some of the most intense transition points of their lives. And then I also paid attention to what I didn't love, which was navigating a court system that is incredibly inhumane, incredibly unjust, inefficient, and sort of all of the stressors that came along with that. So I thought, how can I double click on the things that light me up, minimize the things that don't? And I came to coaching. So I completed my training in December. And yeah, I'm really, really glad to be here.
Nice. Amazing. And I know we have like a whole kind of like content plan structure, but just wanted to first kind of dig in to the pivot you made and something you said, because a lot of people who come to these conversations are trying to figure out like, what is their next step? And so you mentioned you were doing immigration and you found coaching, and you're trying to double click on the things that light you up and minimize the things that don't, which is so funny you say that, because that's like a rallying cry I give to people with your profile. And that's because people like you, they have like if you imagine this cup, it's like your energy tank. The more you do things that light you up, so that double click, it's like the more energy you have. And then conversely, the more you spend your time doing things that don't, it kind of like doesn't. And so I would love for people out there where this could be helpful. How did you kind of find the courage, or how did you know it was time to kind of make the leap from doing immigration work, which you mentioned you had been doing for 6 years, to doing something completely different? Like, what did that kind of mental process or decision-making process look like for you?
It was not easy. And so I will say this for everyone, like no matter, in law, not in law, it required a lot of identity deconstruction, and that is difficult, but also very powerful and very transformative. And I think relying on a community and on others is hugely helpful. Family, friends, coaches, therapists, like the whole team, the whole community. But also just to like really trust yourself that when something, it feels like it's just not aligning anymore, and like it's just becoming more of a slog, like, you can trust that. And I think I spent too long being like, is it me or the job? Is it me or the job? And ultimately it doesn't really matter. Like what matters is that there's a misalignment, and that's really worth paying attention to. And so that's like something I love doing in coaching too, is helping people trust their gut on that, and then realize like, actually you do have a lot of insight into what you want to do next, even if you don't know it.
I 1,000,000% agree. And that might be a great segue to talking about how you can actually make those decisions, find that trust, when you're making decisions from a values-based perspective versus a goals-based perspective. And so was, I think, angling on this kind of intersection or duality, was that like something you found in your self-coaching that you brought forward to your coaching? Like, how did that start, and what has been your experience just trying to distinguish between being goals focused, which I think a lot of us have been traditionally, to someone who's much more values based?
Yeah. So I have always been a pretty high achiever. I've set goals and I've gone for them.
Yep.
And it took working with my own coach through this transition to accept that I could still be the person I want to be if I reorient and even sometimes downshift my goals. So that was actually work that I did with my own coach, and that was really helpful. And through that work, I was introduced to the work of Russ Harris, who is a psychiatrist I believe he's a psychiatrist, a doctor in Australia who specializes in acceptance and commitment therapy, which I draw on a lot in my coaching. And Russ Harris has this really nice metaphor that maybe can like introduce us to the values goals divide. So if you think of like two people on a road trip, kids riding to the Grand Canyon, they're in a car, they're super excited, they want to reach this destination, right? That's the goal. The goal is to have this really fun vacation in the Grand Canyon. One kid in the back of the car is like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? I'm bored. This is boring. I hate this. I'm car sick. This is terrible. Let's just get there. And the other kid is like, wow, look at the trees outside. Let's count all the red cars. Like, this is so fun. Let's stop at a rest stop and get a snack, right? And if you think of those two kids, like they both reach the destination, hopefully, but one of them has enjoyed the journey there, right? Yep. And then you can think of that same scenario. The car breaks down 3 hours outside the Grand Canyon. They never make it. They're both, of course, disappointed, right? Like that disappointment is normal and there's a place for it. But one of the kids enjoyed the journey.
Yep.
And that is a living by the values. So if the goal is the destination you want to reach, something that you want in life, the value is how you want to live, even as you travel there, whether or not you arrive and after you arrive.
Oh, I love that. I'm stealing that because, I mean, even for me, in addition to the values, what I pulled out of that analogy is also the value of staying present, which when you're so goals focused, you're thinking inherently on the future. Like, have I hit this future state? Versus to your point, when it's values based, it sounds like you're much more anchored in the present moment. And it's less about the attainment of this thing in the future and more about the getting there and like living this value out.
Yeah, exactly. Because we're going to spend much of our life in pursuit of a goal and very little of our life in the space of achieving that goal, right? Because if you think about it, like you're moving towards, let's say, acceptance to law school. The moment of acceptance is the phone call you get, the celebration you have with your friends. And then how long after are you like, okay, now I have to start law school, right? Like now the next goal is on the horizon and I have to start working towards that one. So if it's all right with you, I can sort of jump into like framing the problem, like what happens when we focus on goals first.
Yes, please. Yeah, let's give us some examples and I'm happy to like jump in too.
Yeah. So I think, I don't know, so it was like thinking in the context of lawyers, if you kind of think of the classic, like apply to law school, get in, get to 1L, want to get good grades, want to get that coveted job, get that job, get to that job, want to, excel, bill the most hours, like want to, and then like, it's just on and on and on and on, right?
It's milestones. It's well trodden, which I call it the current. I'm like, the legal current is great if you're like, I just want to do this thing. I don't have many resources. You can just kind of catch it. And the milestones are very predetermined. And I think that's why a lot of people, especially folks who are trying to leave that current and that well-defined path, have so many issues like deviating, because it's like, well, if I do X, B, A, B, C, D, I can get to like this pot of money or this like status or whatever that end goal is. But then you're right. As soon as you get there, like partner, for example, it restarts. So
yeah, right. There's like no there. So when we focus on goals first, and this can apply to any field, because I know there's definitely non-lawyers on this call, but when we focus on goals first and we achieve one, the goalposts move. So then we move, we set another goal, we set our sights higher and higher, and we are on this hamster wheel. Like if you can just kind of think back to a time that you achieved a goal that you worked really hard towards, how long did that sense of satisfaction last?
Fleeting. Like, for example, one that's common is in the startup space for entrepreneurs is fundraising. And a lot of times when you're fundraising, you will see, like, I'll use my company's name, Duos raised a $15 million Series A, and like you're like, oh yay, Series A, so fun. But what you don't realize is that you're so exhausted and so many steps have happened by the time you even announce it and you get it, that as soon as you close a round, you're immediately thinking about what you need to do to set yourself up for the next round. Like, how much money do you have? Like, what metrics do you need to hit? It's like a never ending cycle a lot of the times. And so that's like a professional and personal one where it just feels like it's a never ending kind of hamster wheel.
Yeah. And then the other, another thing, a pitfall of focusing on goals first is that you feel like a failure if you fall short. So if the goal, is a certain Series A and you don't quite achieve it, like, what do you make that mean about you? And this is one of my favorite coaching questions is like someone says, I wanted to get X job and I didn't get an interview, or I wanted to get a promotion and I was passed over for it. And it's like, yeah, and that disappointment's real, and there's like space and time, and it belongs. But what are you making it mean about you?
Yeah, that's a good point, because then your identity gets wrapped up in it. And so when you don't have it, then a lot of times that energy gets directed inward, and it's like, I am bad, or something about me is not ideal.
Yeah. And also, speaking to your point about the milestones, like in the specific to the legal profession, oftentimes with goals, we're not the ones who dictate them.
Oh, never.
So I find like values are obviously, like, there is social and cultural conditioning around values 100%, but I find that they're a little more impervious to convention. Like, they are more personal in some ways, and the goals tend to be kind of externally set.
That's actually a great call out that I hadn't really thought about. And if you think about like those legal milestones, all of those things are things that we could both articulate. They're not written down somewhere. And I'm sure when we graduated from HLS, we both had those same like basket of goals, and where we got them from, I don't know. And I'm actually working with a lot of lawyers right now to try to figure out like whose goals are in the basket. Because to your point, it's often not they didn't put them there. It's either your parents or your peers or society, or just what we assume is like success. Those become your goals, and that's what you put in your basket, and that's what you're holding on to. But the energy to hold a basket of goals that's not your own is extreme. Insert burnout, chronic fatigue, illness, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also like, it's the water we swim in. So it's hard to know that, this goal of working at, XYZ place feels like the be all end all because it's the be all end all for the, 200 people in my class. But you step out of that and like, no one knows what you're talking about,
What did you say? It's the pool that we're swimming in?
Like the water we're swimming in.
I love that.
Fish never notice.
Yeah, the water we're swimming in. I mean, that's so great, because a lot of times when you're talking to, I'm sure you experience this, lawyers who are seeking to do any sort of pivot, even if it's to stay in the law, if you're surrounded by people who are drinking the Kool-Aid or in the same swimming water, you're not going to get a diversity of perception. And so I've always felt in my coaching practice for people too is finding what I call like, I don't call it, but people call it expanders. Like, are there other, individuals or people that kind of have what you have or what you're trying to call in as a different version of, like, that's their swimming water. Because a lot of times if you're just surrounded by the same type of people, which often happens in the legal profession, you almost need to go out of your kind of sandbox and go find a new person or new idea to even get the inspiration of what your goals and like what your life actually should look like, or what you want it to look like.
Yeah, for sure. And Yeah, I think, and the flip side of not being the ones who often dictate our own goals is that you can feel guilty when you don't have the right goals, you know?
Mhm.
So like a lot of clients tell me, well, I don't have a 5-year plan. Like, I know that I want a job that feels fulfilling, but I don't have a specific 5-year plan. And I'm like, that's great. Like, that's great news. That
Yeah.
means that there's so many options out there.
White space. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Um,
there's that dissonance between the milestone, if you stay within the like predetermined steps, you're like, I have a 10-year roadmap that you inherited, like you said, from somewhere else.
yeah. Yeah. And I do want to also mention the kind of particular pitfall of focusing on goals in the context of some like social justice, public interest work. That's the world that I have come from. And that's that the goal might be aspirational, right? So like when you think of the mission of an organization, or the mission of a immigrants' rights lawyer is to move the needle in society at large towards justice, to change a system, or even when you're trying to achieve results for a client, there is this sense of like wanting to achieve like stability and justice for them, right? And or there's this kind of like implicit goal of like, we're going to help as many people as we can, right? If you're like a legal services lawyer, like we're going to help as many people stay in stable housing as possible to try to kind of like balance the scales a little bit. And when we're focused on that goal at the expense of value, so we're showing up of like, how much have I done? Have I done enough? Is it enough? Isn't enough? It never feels like enough, right? When the goal is like
that, like when you were an immigration attorney, of like how that looked like, what that looked like for you, if you don't mind sharing.
yeah, I think so this could happen sort of on and this is not to diminish the value of that work. I think it is incredibly valuable and I love it. I think that if I was showing up to my cases, prioritizing the value of justice, humility, diligence, compassion, then I can do work as hard as I can on the case and be able to sort of accept that there are things that are outside my control. And when I'm focused on the goal of like, either like I must get for this client, or I must get status for as many clients as possible because the need is endless, then I'm spinning my wheels in a way that becomes really unproductive because I'm like, maybe there's a little more I can do. What else can I do? Let me check this one more time. Let me check this for the 800th time. It's just like, it can be a subtle shift, but I think it can be very powerful to like know that you're doing enough when you are showing up by the values that you want to be living by.
I love that. I mean, and I think a lot of us struggle, especially to your point about high achievers, with that urge of always being productive, of like every drop of time needs to be productive. And if, to your point, if you're either consciously or subconsciously thinking, I need to do more and more and more, you're never off. You're always on. And I'm sure the times you actually were off, you probably felt that you weren't doing enough. And then that gets to inadequacy, which a lot of high achievers ironically also really struggle with. Like, am I worthy? Am I enough? Am I showing up enough? And then lastly, with the legal profession, even rooted in the law school and how it's graded on the curve, you're always comparing yourself to your peers. And so if you have there is so much need in society that I need to do as much as possible, and the idea of like, I need to also be running at the front of the pack, that just probably means burnout or feeling like you're never good enough, like, and I think even if people are living a values focused life, from my friends who've done public interest work, it's already so emotionally taxing that you probably already are predisposed to feel like I'm not doing enough, because no matter how many people I help, like these systemic problems still persist. So,
Yeah. And it's exactly. And it's a subtle point because when you live a values focused life, you still have goals. Goals are great, right? But it's like, what do you kind of put at the forefront? And so the goal can still be zealous advocacy for your client. The goal can still be gaining the protection that they're seeking in whatever field you're working in. And there's an acceptance in putting the values first that we are operating in a system much larger than ourselves, with forces that are outside of our control, and that if we falsely believe that we can control those things by saying like, but I can achieve this, I can achieve this, I can achieve this, then we're not setting anyone up for long-term success. Right?
I agree.
Yeah.
Yes, Sally?
Well, I love hearing both of you talk. And, Melanie, you brought up this acceptance of commitment therapy earlier, but, hearing both of you talk about, sort of the balance that always has to be achieved, I believe, between the goals and the values. It's not an either or, and the being enough, not being enough, the being and the doing, all of these things, and coming out of a place that rewards high achievement. And the definition of high achievement is often measured in such a way that, may have to do with money and influence and power and all of these kinds of things. I'm interested in hearing both of your perspectives about, are you believe that you can redefine success? Do you believe that when you come out of places like a Harvard, that is legitimately an extraordinary place for many and has, produced lots of different kinds of extraordinary people doing amazing things, can you redefine this and help others to redefine it, success?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in, Melanie.
Yeah, go ahead. You can go first. Yeah.
I think it's incumbent on everyone, regardless of educational background or where they're at, to define what success looks like for them. Because I think if you don't take that time, to Melanie's point, to figure out, it's like similar with the goals, like you're inheriting these goals that aren't even yours. A lot of times the way we think about success is heavily conditioned, often based on our parents or like early schooling, but it's like a very conditioned way we view success. And I think earlier, Melanie, when you were saying, when you don't meet those goals, there's disappointment, there's like internal rage, and essentially. And one of the things I really love about, in particular, human design is that it helps you kind of pinpoint how you're probably defining success in a way that may be inauthentic to you. So for example, in human design, I'm what's called a projector. And very long story short, projectors often define personal success based off of achievement. Have I went to Harvard Law School? Did I get the degree? Did I work at like this place? Like these achievements is how I have this like success currency. And then for people like Melanie, often their kind of currency on success is based on the doing. Have I like seen 15 clients? Have I done these different things and activities? And I think there is a balance to be there's a balance to be found, but the idea is, if you're already predisposed to have a conditioned idea of what success means like to you, it becomes even more important in this day and age to define what success means authentically to you and based on your values and what you truly want. Because a lot of us, I would even probably argue the majority of people who haven't like really done the work to redefine success are probably defining success in a way that is based upon other people's perceptions that they've just kind of inherited and ingested and incorporated into their lives over the years. But Millie, I would love to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah, I agree with everything.
Sally, thank you.
I agree with everything you're saying. And I think that because it is so, like, success is so individually determined, and the true kind of like authentic feeling of success is based on one's unique values, and that's going to be different for every person, that this is, I think, something that has to happen on an interpersonal level, because there are some people for whom, going to Harvard Law, graduating, getting that most prestigious clerkship job, whatever, is going to be their authentic, is going to be living out their values. Mm-hmm. And that's great. And so it's just a matter of like helping people flex their own muscle of being able to determine what their values are and what success looks like for them. And I love seeing the proliferation of coaching in schools, grad programs, companies. And I just hope that coaching is aligned towards helping people figure out what they really want and the value they can really bring forward. And yeah, not just kind of like keeping them in a place that might not be aligned.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. I wonder if it would be, we can now kind of like turn to the positive side of like what's good about focusing on values. I think we framed up the problem. What do you think?
I love that.
Okay. So the the focus on values, I mentioned acceptance and commitment training, and Russ Harris has pioneered this this like way of thinking about values in places where people are really, really disenfranchised and actually don't have a lot of choice. So he's mentioned that he's used the model in refugee camps, where people are pretty much stuck where they are and don't have a lot of say over what happens next in certain aspects, very important aspects of their lives. And what he's said, or what the research has showed, is that reorientation towards one's values and the way that one always has agency to live by one's values, no matter your life circumstances, can be very empowering.
Yeah.
And so, even when there is so much that is beyond our control, the forces that are in the world and or even like in our own bodies, the things that we just can't control, we have the power to live by those values, and that can be a really powerful thing.
Yeah, that's really powerful, because it's like, even if your your base needs aren't met, a lot of times it's kind of like the values at that point kind of probably go out the window. But it's like, how can you stay as integral and like living in integrity as much as possible, given very dire circumstances? I love that.
Yeah. And also, even if you're not even if there aren't these forces that feel, like really constraining, a focus on values can still make the whole journey towards the goal worthwhile. So like, we talked about the car metaphor, but if you even think about like, working towards a promotion, right? But like not losing yourself in the process, and like continuing to show up, to really paying attention to the things that light you up versus the things that deplete you, showing up every day as the person that you want to be, regardless of whether or not the goal is achieved at the end. You can honestly say that you've been living the life you want.
I love that. Yeah, that's really powerful, especially when you have been living a life that doesn't feel like your own or feels misaligned.
Yeah. And I think in general, this is just, it's like a question of flexibility to the inevitable twists and turns of life. So we set out these goals, and sometimes we meet them, and that's great for a little while, and then we have the next one. But like, you want to make those spaces between worthwhile, because it's really the spaces between that make up our lives. And when life throws us the curveball, and maybe then the goalposts blow away in the tornado, we can still show up as the person we want to be. And I think a really great example of this is my grandpa, and this is very timely because he passed away over the weekend. And so
I didn't know that.
He's a really great guy, and I think he really exemplified this because he was an electrical engineer, and a successful one. So he invented all these like things that tested transformers and other pieces of electrical equipment that I don't completely understand, but he would build one and it would have some, success, and then a bigger firm would come along and do it better and cheaper and knock him out of the market. And then he said he would then, use the profits from that one to fund the development of the next one. We just kind of keep going, right? And he was really committed to his values of ingenuity and creativity and scientific discovery. And there came a point when he made an invention to test transformers. It was pretty successful. And then he thought, like, I have this on lock. This is it. And a couple of years later, someone else came along. The technology had changed. So instead of using a computer, they were using a computer chip, and they, knocked him out of the market. And he's like, you know what? Like, we're not actually really going to be able to compete. And so instead of sort of letting that crush him, right? Like the next goal of like inventing the next durable, like innovation was out of sight. He continued to live every day. And he said this to me, that like every day was a little challenge to be solved. Every day there was something to figure out, and he got such immense joy just from doing that. So even when it wasn't driving, the profit share of his business, it wasn't, for prestige, it wasn't for financial gain, it was for the love of innovating. And if you like saw his house, there'd be like a roof leak, and he would have like rigged up some crazy thing to like try to plug it, or like he's just like just a really like lovely kind of nutty professor vibe, and like the twists and turns of life are that we get older and the markets change and our role in the world changes, and we might not be preeminent in the way that we weren't once were, right? Like that will happen to all of us, but we can all decide to keep living by our values no matter what.
Yes,
So I just wanted to give you that story as sort of a, I don't know, an homage to Arthur Zuch.
No, I love that. And, you know, just the idea of, like you said, we will all face challenges. And I am someone who's like a lifelong learner. So I really empathize with the story about your granddad of like, how can you, despite your best efforts and being first, continue to have motivation and energy to pursue life, right? Because it is hard, especially when you're in the right, you're doing things the way you're supposed to, and things happen. I think that's when this values work becomes invaluable. And that's something that's really helped me with like dealing with my mom and being a caregiver to her is when I'm feeling emotionally exhausted and spent and like scared and anxious, what are the practices and things I can go back to feel more grounded and centered and sure about whatever path I'm on. So yes, thank you so much for sharing your story too about your granddad.
Yeah. Would you want to share some of those practices that you come back to?
Oh yes. So I think it's really two ways I approach it. There's the practices that I use when I'm like in it, like in the thick of things. I think when I was at like the law firm, for example, as soon as I would have to work like late or had like a crazy deal, the first thing to go were the things that would take care of me. So I would, you know, not get as much sleep, and you don't get enough sleep, then you're not working out, and then you're like not eating the best food because I'm either emotionally eating or like, you know, eating at weird hours. And so fast forward, I try to make sure, like I was in St. Louis with my mom for a medical procedure this past week, that I am waking up and I'm meditating every day as much as possible. I'm getting outside because getting in nature is just so helpful. And as one woman, I haven't fact checked this, I probably should before I repeat it, but we are where we are. She was basically saying that when you're walking, unless you're like in actual danger, it's like a way to do like trauma release in a way, because your brain can't fire in the same way, because it's like kind of focus on the motion. And so for me, like walking outside in nature, journaling, like doubling down on all the practices, doing yoga every day was really helpful. And then when I got back home, I have a version of my values exercise I call my bar stools, because if you think about bar stools, if it's 4 of them, if one isn't really kind of fulfilled or aligned, you're kind of wobbly. And if all of them are not really being fed, you're on the floor. And so I do an audit with my bar stools, and it's 4 of them, and I kind of go through it. I'm like, okay, where am I for each of them? And how can I start intentionally pouring into them so that I can kind of feel better? If I haven't had a chance to eat as healthy, like I'm going to eat healthy meals. Like let me tee that up. Let me make sure I'm journaling. Let me do a release. Like I carry a lot of tension in my body, so sometimes I'll come back and get like a massage to just literally get the physical tension out. But I'm just like very intentional on how I spend my time in very troubling or emotionally heavy times to make sure I'm just resourcing myself, knowing that I'm going to feel a little heavy.
Yeah, and it sounds like that is really in service of some of your core values. I mean, tell me where I'm wrong, but like with the core value of like being a present caretaker, and like showing up with compassion for yourself and your mom and the people around you. And that's really, these things are really in service of that.
Yes. And then when you get really busy, because we're both building our businesses with those core values in place, it lets me know where I should focus my attention. Because if everything's super busy and you're trying to like do all the things, the first thing to go should really be the thing that's not in service of your core values, to the extent you feel overextended.
Yeah. I have a little activity we can do to try to identify our values.
Yeah. So like we should do something so people can identify their values.
Okay.
So,
I have so if everyone can just imagine, and close your eyes if you want to, imagine that you're at your 80th birthday party and your best friend gets up to talk about you, to give a speech about you. What do you hope that they will say about you as a person? You can just write down like, or just jot in your phone, or just kind of call to mind a few things. And Jacques, if you want to kind of answer, you're welcome to.
Yeah. So for me, when I like think about this question, I think about the speech Oprah gave about her relationship and the impact that Maya Angelou had on her life. because Maya Angelou was this woman who was like older and like a steward to Oprah. And I forget what it was, but it was towards the end of Maya Angelou's life. And she gave this like moving talk about how she loved Maya Angelou because she was a creative, but she also really touched the lives of the people around her, whether it was family or friends or like just people who were touched by her art and her presence. And so I would love at my 80th birthday if my best friend gave a similar speech and talked about, here is someone who lived in integrity, they were authentic, they touched the lives of other people, whether it was in big ways or small. And, I just want to be one of those people where I always leave you better than I found you. And so that's ideally what I would want my like legacy to be, is like someone who gave more than they took.
That's so resonant with me. And so what, that really resonates. So the things I pulled out, and tell me if I got this right, or that really there are these values of authenticity, integrity, impact, and like compassion, compassion and healing. Do you feel that?
Oh yeah. I mean, actually, and this is great for me because in human design, projectors can see everything else very clearly, but not themselves. And so I appreciate you mirroring back compassionate healing, because that's separate from impact, but I would have just lumped them all together. And so I think authenticity, integrity, impact, and compassionate healing really summarize that quite well. The only other one I would add is what I call expansion. I love to learn. And so if I've been in a job or just anywhere, I have a saying, if I'm not growing, I'm going. And so like your grandpa, it sounds like I need to be constantly like innovating or thinking or learning or just growing as a person. So that's the only one I would add. But I think the first four really encapsulated my values really clearly.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, when you did yours, I know you touched a little bit on the impact that you want to have at work. For other folks, if you feel like this friend at your 80th birthday party spoke more about your personal life, you can recreate it and say, like, this second speaker is a longtime coworker, if you will have already retired by the time you're 80, that's great, but like, think of an old, like, what you can do, recreate the activity, and like, who is the person that you want to have been at work? And then comparing those two, are they different? Are they aligned? That could be really interesting data.
Yeah.
And then this is something that's like sort of actionable, and it's a little wacky, but I want to really recommend it to folks because it helped me a lot. And it's a way to put a values-focused life into practice. And this happens, what is like the ship metaphor, that like a ship, the way to turn a ship is 1 degree at a time.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Brick by brick.
Do you want to pick one of these values to focus on?
Yeah, let's do authenticity.
Okay. So everyone can like pick one of the values that they've pulled out on their list. And I will say, like, if you've written out kind of what you want your best friend to say about you at your 80th birthday party, there are lists of values online you can look at. Brene Brown has one, Russ Harris has one. That can be sort of useful in going down and being like, oh yeah, it's that one. So I would recommend doing that. And pick one of these values. So authenticity. And now list 3 things that you're planning to do tomorrow. Just like, can be run of the mill. Like what's on your agenda tomorrow?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me just
breakfast.
My calendar. Yeah, I want to go to the gym. I have some work to do. I have a bunch of work to get through. And then I guess the last one would be my partner has like a presentation. So I want to join this like virtual presentation thing that he has tomorrow.
Great. And now, so for everyone who's thought about the 3 things that you're going to do tomorrow, how can you infuse each of these activities with that value? And you can be creative. So when I was doing this activity myself, my value was being open-hearted. And one of them was like commuting to my office, right? And like getting on the New York City subway. Like, what does it look like to do that with just like a little bit more open-heartedness, right? Like it can be whatever you make of it, right? But just, it's like to have in mind? It's the flavoring and savoring exercise that Russ Harris does. How can you flavor that activity with a little bit of authenticity?
I love that, flavor and savor. Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I'm going to the gym. This is a funny note, but with my type in human design, I mentioned I was a projector. We have the tendency to hide, not like actually hide, but like energetically hide. It's like the energy of like, I just want to do the work, put my head down and like not do the rest of the stuff. And I realized that sometimes I would go to the gym and I would wear like muted colors when I normally love like bright, vibrant colors because I didn't want the attention on me. And it was like happening unconsciously. So I think tomorrow going to the gym and wearing my most authentic, vibrant colored workout clothes and, you know, doing whatever feels good in my body at the time versus working out the way I think I should or being like, you know, wedded to a schedule unnecessarily. I think with work, I think, you know, becoming a coach has really unlocked my authenticity because I think, I forget the exact words you said, but when you're making that jump from like legal to like holding yourself as this healer, as this coach, there is a lot of identity deconstruction that has to happen. And so something I always want to do is like make sure that when I'm working with a client or creating something, that I'm infusing my authenticity in it and not thinking about what will be successful, what does this person need to hear? Like, you know, like the more of the kind of posturing, I feel like that's more common, especially in some of the legal roles. And then with my partner, it's a Zoom call, so I can like authentically sip my coffee while I'm doing it, or send him like a cute, like maybe voice note or something afterwards. But that's like what immediately comes to mind.
Yeah, and you know, like nothing is too small. Like these are all like little ways to just kind of infuse your day to day with the value you want to espouse, and that's how the life is built, right? 1 minute, 1 day, 1 moment at a time. And so, yeah, I think that's really, really great. And then as the kind of extra credit, not that we should be so goals focused here, but
Come on now, we love extra.
outside of your to-do list, is there one thing you can do tomorrow to specifically ground yourself in this value that you've chosen, and this value for you, Jacques, of authenticity?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Something it has been on my to-do list, and it's like burning a hole if I'm being transparent, is being more authentic and transparent on social media. I think I'm getting there, but it honestly has been somewhat of a struggle for me to really be like completely vulnerable. And I have some time tomorrow, and I have a post that I need to create, and so maybe I wasn't planning on it, but I can sit down and focus on for this specific social media moment, whatever that looks like. How can I bring my full, authentic Jacques self to whatever communication I'm trying to put out there to the universe?
I love that. I'm excited to read it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll make it about this call. Make about this. I'll tag you.
Yeah, and so for everyone else, like this is the kind of flavoring and savoring. The savoring being when you flavor every activity with this value, then notice what comes up. What do you see? And for the next week, use the same value. Like kind of do it for 7 days in a row, and then next week try another. Notice what comes up, and you know, set goals. That goals are beautiful. Goals are great, and then every step towards it, reground yourself in these values. Am I living by the value of authenticity, integrity, impact, healing as I work towards my goal of X? And what are the areas of my life that feel most incongruous with these values? And can I get that back into alignment? So that's what I have to offer today.
I love this. I love this so much. I love the idea of flavor and savor. I love things that are unique like that. So that's a great tidbit for us to definitely put in our pockets and our personal toolkits. Crystal, I think, maybe let me just make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly. You raised your hand.
I think Crystal left
It's
dropped off.
Okay, never mind. Disregard. But I mean, we do have time for a little bit of Q&A, and I also have some questions teed up for Melanie to the extent there are no questions from the audience. Any questions? Yes, Eric?
I'm just wondering, like, in terms of values versus goals, since we're all like dynamic people that are always changing, and sometimes our values are changing as well, like how do you guys think about checking in with yourself about how your values might be changing over time, and how to kind of like stay on top of that and incorporate it into this line of thinking? Yeah.
I think that's such a good question, and I think values absolutely do shift over time. I mean, you can think of like having kids, and suddenly, you know, the value of being a present parent or whatever, like it does shift. And I think checking in with yourself and having the self-awareness around like what your values are and doing the exercises to be able to ascertain your values is important and a continuous exercise. I think that's something that's really nice about values, is that it feels less, maybe this is just me, but it feels less loaded to shift them, you know?
Yeah.
Like if a value was like spending as much time with friends as possible at one point in my life, and then at another point in my life the value was like rest, right? And then allowing it to shift back, like that. I feel like we often give ourselves greater allowance to kind of float on the waves of shifting values more than like, I wanted to be a doctor, but now I think I don't anymore.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent question. I agree with everything you said, Melanie. And I think, Eric, for me, what I recommend, I mean, what I do myself and what I recommend to like clients is having either quarterly or at least yearly check-ins with how you're doing as a human. And I even ask people to rank from a scale of 1 to 10 their values for a given, whatever that period is. So if you're looking at like, you know, let's call it first half 2024, if I were to write down the 4 values that we identified on the call for myself, I can rank them on a scale of 1 to 10. And the ones that are low, I can have a conversation with myself and think about, is this one low because for many reasons I just could not pour into this value, or has something happened in my life that's caused a shift? Like what Melanie was saying, like maybe if I value hanging out with my friends before and now the value is rest, my, you know, ability to rest is probably an 8. My ability to see friends could be a 4. And so maybe there's a chance there to reconcile kind of your past behavior with like how you want to move forward in the future in a values-based way. Excellent question. Any other questions from the audience? Well, Melanie, I have, if people have questions from them, oh yes, jump in.
I probably should have asked this at the very beginning, because apropos of what Eric just asked, how do you define what a value is?
Yeah, a value is the way that you want to, is the quality of how you want to live your life, or the quality of the person that you want to be.
But to some extent, there are fixed values. So if the quality of the way you want to live your life is being a loving person, might be one thing, being authentic, living in integrity, it seems to me that something like rest might be a temporary thing you put value on, or it's like a little different ranking, if you will, than sort of, I don't know, maybe it's getting into sort of foundational or core values versus situational values, and maybe that's too esoteric. But just in listening to the question Eric asked about changing values through time, of course, life cycles change, you know, and of course, when you're younger, some things you put value on might look differently as you get older. But aren't there certain values that are just sort of essential or core that?
I think absolutely. And it's just a matter of sort of like where they rank, you know, like, so I think that the values you pulled out of like being loving, of authenticity, like things like that, like, yes, they are quite core, and then they just play out at different points in your life. And oftentimes people feel like there's a values conflict, but it's more likely like a time management conflict.
Right. Like you can value friendship greatly, but also understand that when you're raising children and you've got a lot of demands on your time, you might not be able to see your friends that often. It doesn't mean you don't value friendships. It just means the way it looks, you know, at that moment in time is going to be different than it might look when, you know, your kids are grown or you don't have any children at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I think it's both. Like, I think values are more immutable than goals generally. And I think that there's room for expansion and addition, and so and subtraction. And so, you know, maybe in a few years, my core value, my biggest value will be creativity or curiosity or inquiry, whatever. Like, so it's just kind of, it's allowing the space.
Good. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great.
Thank you. I guess our last 2 minutes, Melanie, I would love to know from you, because I always ask people this, what's the one wellness tip you refuse to gatekeep? I'm always about sharing like favorite tips and tricks, and I can give mine as you probably like try to think of an answer about yours. But my favorite one is just having a morning practice. Having a morning practice is the thing I always tell people completely changed my life. In terms of living a more values-based life and also just living a more grounded and centered life. But I'm curious, Melanie, like, what do you think is your number one wellness or mindful tip that you would pass on to other people?
I think, oh gosh, that is such a good question. I think it would be that you can't control your emotions that come up. We can only have some input in how we react to them.
I love that. Yes, especially so with the emotional authority, you like have emotional highs and lows, and it's just riding out that wave. So that's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you to the HLSA for allowing me to create this fireside chat, and everyone here for your great questions and your input. There will be a recording of this panel. I will send that via email to everyone who RSVP'd. And if you have any questions, please let me know. You can respond there. And I will CC Melanie in case you have questions for her. But Melanie, thank you so much for your time and putting on this like great presentation on values. I'm sure a lot of us took a lot from it, including myself. And I just want to give you your flowers and say thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone have a great day.
Bye. Thank you.